Cool.
Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Whenever you might be checking us out, we are super excited that you are here with us on another amazing episode of the Richard Watkins Podcast. I am your host, Richard Watkins, and I'm super excited to be with you all today. And before we go any further, we have to give a huge shout out to who makes this possible, the Science Policy Action Network, or SPAN. SPAN fills the gap between science and societal needs through research, consulting, and engagement. Check out more on SPAN on span-inc.org. That is span-inc.org. But without any further ado, we have an amazing guest with us today, Erik MacIntosh. Erik, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
All right, so I know you do a lot regarding community engagement, working with the Morehead Planetarium and Science Center, but I know you can do it better justice than I can. What do you do?
Yeah, thanks. I'm the community engagement manager for Morehead Planetarium and Science Center. So I work on our kind of education and programs team. And the community engagement team kind of does kind of what it sounds like. We engage with the community, so we have partnerships with organizations kind of outside of the walls of Morehead Planetarium and UNC Chapel Hill, which is where we're located. The biggest thing we do every year is produce the North Carolina Science Festival, which is a statewide month-long celebration of STEM that takes place every April. So we just wrapped that up last month, and then we're still kind of putting the numbers together, but it was another great year. We work with in a typical year, 200 to 300 partners around the state who all produce fun, engaging, unique science education outreach events. We also have some school initiatives that we work with elementary and middle schools to connect science and scientists with the public and the youth. And then, of course, we do all sorts of other things. We do community skywatching events. We do science communication trainings. And we show up at events, all around the triangle and all around the state to have fun with science.
Speaking of which, it was a lot of fun reading a little bit about you before this episode, right? And I landed on the NC Festival kind of landing page where it gives like a bio on all your teammates, right? And on there it says, favorite historical science figure, right? You got Marie Curie up there, but for you, it is Archimedes. So tell me a little bit about why you landed on that particular historical figure and like, what does he mean for you in regards to both history and science?
Oh, great question. So, that's one of the fun things we did with our bios. We all, picked different historical figures. And one of the things I liked um, you know, about that process and being creative with that is thinking about, what are the kind of the roots of science and who does science, who are the people doing STEM, and it goes back a long ways. I mean, you think about, it's not just people in lab coats, with test tubes and pipettes and fancy equipment. We go back, the history of science, and scientific discovery goes back thousands of years. And so that's one of the reasons I thought that would be a fun choice to think about, how do we explore the world around us? How do we make sense of things and then, start to quantify that a little bit. And that's a little bit what science is.
I mean, that was a guy who was like really ahead of his time. And I'm thinking about scientific engagement and community outreach now. And I'm like wondering, what was Archimedes trying to do to get the word out about, you know, mathematics and exploration of the universe? I wonder how he was telling folks, or if he even cared at all. I would have to say, if I were to pick one, like if I was on your team and they asked, like, Richard, who's your favorite? I think I'd have to pick Francis Bacon, the guy that they said the scientific method came from. I just thought that was fantastic because I don't know if he ever did a scientific experiment, yet he created science as we know it. And I just thought that was just like a guy who never did an experiment uh, created science. I just thought that was fascinating. Going back to outreach and engagement, if I understand correctly, and just please correct me if I'm wrong, your background in undergrad was physics, or am I
Yeah.
off?
Yeah, so as an undergrad, I was at UNC Chapel Hill. I was a physics major. I took, all the astronomy courses I could. Working as an undergrad actually at Morehead Planetarium, we hire a ton of undergraduates to give planetarium shows, do science outreach, just the gift shop and ticket office. It's a great opportunity, and I appreciate it as a undergrad getting a chance to work at the planetarium. It kind of shaped my career trajectory from thinking about, do I just want to do science and getting into physics and astronomy, or actually kind of the education outreach component's a lot of fun, and sharing that excitement and that passion. And so that's what led me to say, maybe I'll take some education classes. And I did a student teaching in my senior year, and graduated from UNC with high school teaching certification. But I decided that working in the museum world is a little bit more up my alley. I had a little bit more fun with that. And so that's how I kind of got on this arc, and it's been a fun ride ever since.
Absolutely. So physics at UNC, and forgive me if I'm wrong, but you also did a little bit at NC State as well after you finished up at UNC.
Yeah, so that's where I did my master's in education at NC State, with a kind of focus on science education. They've got a great program over there, and um, that's, yeah, I continued my education a little bit, and then I've kind of stayed in that realm.
So, all right. So you've been, trained up a physicist, well, an undergraduate. I don't know if somebody who just does undergraduate physics is called a physicist. All right, I guess this
It's
is your
probably not.
first. Yeah, yeah, help us out, right? Right. Part of community engagement is sometimes answering these questions that we take for granted. So you did undergrad in physics. So are you a physicist? When do you become a physicist?
Well, I'd say, I'm not a practicing physicist, right? I'm not doing experiments. I'm not, involved in research. So I'd say I'm more of a science educator than a scientist. We have a very academic definition we can get into of who is a STEM professional, but, in shorthand, it's people who we use the term scientist, but we kind of broadly mean STEM professionals, for people who actually do science for their jobs, whether that's research at a university, whether that's in a lab in healthcare, and in the basement of a hospital, doing running tests on samples, whether it's the people who are engineers who are figuring out how to run production lines, and kind of you name it. There's a whole bunch of different opportunities out there. And so when we think about who's what we use kind of shorthand for scientists to refer to all those folks, the people who are actually doing work in STEM fields. And so, for me, as an educator, I think I know a little bit about science. I think we're good at explaining science, but actually one of the things that we find from all of the evaluation data we've done over the years, and this has been replicated nationally, is that when people attend events, and they want to learn about scientists or science, when they engage with an actual scientist or a STEM professional, they have a better time. They rate their experiences higher. They say they learn more. They say they feel more inspired to be scientists, which, as an educator, that kind of hurts our feelings. We think we're really good at explaining things, but it turns out people actually really want to connect with scientists. And no matter what metric you measure, they rate their experiences higher when they actually engage with the scientists. That's kind of what we do, is we try to help connect people with scientists, people doing the actual work.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. In your work, statewide and beyond, what type of science do you feel that your audiences are kind of more attracted or intrigued by? Is there a particular type of science? Is it your computer science? I tried to check out I tried to climb to the top of a hotel and check out, but it was canceled due to the storm. So I know sky watching is also really exciting as well. But what's the type of science that you find people are more intrigued by?
I mean, it's everything, I think obviously, working at a planetarium, we're maybe a little bit biased and think, astronomy is a lot of fun. People love looking at stars. They love learning about the planets. That's always just something that's kind of naturally been fascinating people for thousands and thousands of years, right? Is you looking up at the skies and wondering what's out there, and what are those things that we're looking at. Um, but I think the other thing that we find is people are really interested in is current science. When they hear about something in the news, they want to learn more. what is going on, right? When you hear about, whether it's a weather phenomenon or a natural disaster or just and something engineering happens, people want to hear, like, want to learn from experts about, like, just what should we know about these kind of things. And so whenever we can connect kind of the current science, the things that people are hearing about on the news, on increasingly now on social media, things that are going viral and trending, we like to try to find experts who can talk about those topics and answer people's questions, because people are naturally curious and they want to hear from scientists. But by and large, I think one of the great things about the Science Festival and the work we do is that we work with incredible scientists from all backgrounds, all disciplines, and these people are passionate about their work. They're members of the communities that they live in. I think a lot of times people just think about, oh, the scientists are just in labs doing their own thing. But connecting, when we have a scientist visit a middle school classroom, they show pictures of themselves outside of work, talk about their hobbies and talk about what they do and the communities they're in and the things that they're passionate about. I think that's really important, really valuable to see that, like, yeah, science is woven into our communities. There's science happening in places that sometimes we don't even think about, but it's important to talk about and for people to recognize.
Absolutely. I went to the Science Expo this year at Carolina. I took my daughter. I even rounded up my neighbors, and we all went out there. It was awesome, and it was a packed house. Um, I get the sense that, scientific engagement efforts are occurring because we want to make sure the public is more aware of scientific advancements. But I get the sense that, the public is really, really hungry for this information from, and I know you're going to talk about this later, but Science Cafe, obviously the Science Festival, the Science Expo, which is part of the Science Festival. Every time I've ever had any interactions with these events, they've always been well attended. What's on the horizon? Like, what more, can we do in regards to scientific engagement? I know you're actively thinking about that, but what are some new ideas that, you're kind of cooking up?
Yeah, good question. I mean, we're kind of, if we think about the science festival happening every April, it's definitely the planning process is year round. So we're already starting to think about what do we want to do next spring? Who are the partners we want to work with? What are our goals for that kind of education and outreach? Um, and you'll see if you visit our science festival website or go to events, you'll see our Science for All tagline. That's really important to us. That we're making sure that we're providing opportunities for people from all backgrounds and all parts of the state to engage with STEM. And so, obviously we love the huge events on the UNC Chapel Hill campus, on UNC Charlotte's campus, Greensboro, Wilmington, kind of the major universities are all hosting these big events, these big expos as part of the Science Festival. Um, but we're also thinking about what are the opportunities to bring people together and celebrate science, maybe in more rural parts of the state that don't have a kind of a big flagship museum or university in the community. How else can we celebrate science and explore the science happening in those parts of the state? And so we've been fortunate to work with some amazing partners, the community college systems, the library, around, in every county. There are so many great partners who are excited to join us and to celebrate and to host events and kind of be those community convening places to celebrate the science that's going on. And so that's one of the things we're really looking at is who else hasn't participated in the science festival? How can we reach out to them? What do they want? What do they need? What are they interested in? And can we think about using our resources and connections to help them celebrate the science in their communities.
Yeah, you also mentioned like current events. So you got kind of involved with this whole scientific community maybe around, I guess 2007, right? I don't want to, date you too much. I'm just going to say around that time, But so much has happened between 2007 and where we are now. When you think about engagement and communication, is it a more difficult task now than it had been in the past? Because we're talking about, I mean, you probably have workshops or programming around artificial intelligence, right? In 2007, that wasn't something that we were really thinking about. I mean, we were, obviously, there were movies and, Steven Spielberg had AI, right? So we were thinking about this, but it's clear and present right now. And there's countless other technologies such as, genetics, CRISPR. I mean, a dire wolf, right? A replica of a dire wolf. You are talking to folks regarding concepts that no one had ever thought to be possible in the course of human history. What is that like? I mean, I'm sorry, like that is we're doing this in a crazy time. What is that like?
Yes, I mean it's pretty cool that we're in a position, our team and I get a chance to talk to some really incredible scientists who are on the cutting edge of research. They're the ones that are making discoveries. If you think about, just being fortunate to be part of UNC Chapel Hill, which has so many, great, research projects underway. We get to chat with scientists and when they come to us when they say, "Hey, we've got this big grant and we need to do some outreach and our broader impacts for that. Like, can you help us translate that work?" And so we do that in a bunch of different ways. My team, we do science communication training to help them talk about their work because really they're the people that know about it. So we just make sure that they're able to put the content that they're researching into words that the public can understand. Because if you read an academic paper, right, there's a lot of big words in there. There's a lot of acronyms and it gets pretty dense, pretty dry. The average person's not going to sit there and take the time to read through that. They might not even get through the abstract without stumbling over some big words. And very very kind of technical industry jargony terms that just if you're a PhD scientist, that makes sense to you. If you're a PhD scientist in another field, you might not even understand that, right? So one of the things we really like to do is empower the scientists to talk about the work, put that in their own words, in ways that people can understand, whether that's talking to the media, whether it's talking to the public, whether it's talking to children and families. Sometimes it's helping them come up with activities, the hands-on, to kind of demonstrate the some of the concepts behind what they're doing. At Morehead, we have an exhibit space, and so all of the exhibits on our in our breakthrough hub at in the planetarium are based on current research that's happening at UNC Chapel Hill, and so we're working with scientists to create new exhibits and replace them and phase out and cycle through. Uh, we also do things like summer camps and hands-on activities on our exhibit floor in our launch lab, our kind of tinker space in the building. So we've got a great team of folks who help translate that science and make it a little bit more accessible. So I think that's one of the ways that's really exciting is to think about and be creative about how do you translate these kind of high level top concepts and stuff that people have spent years and decades, becoming experts on, you know, how do we help them explain that to the people who haven't spent all that time? And so that's been a lot of fun. And so, we've got, like I said, we've got so many great, passionate scientists who are just excited to get out and talk about their work. And so, just really it's giving them an opportunity to shine and put it in their own words.
Yeah. So I'm just thinking, like, I know this work is really important, but from your point of view, I kind of want to hear how important it is. Like, what would be the consequence if the work you do were to disappear, right? What problems will we see? What will we see? Why is this type of work? I mean, I'm already a member of the choir, right? you already know. But if this work were to disappear, what would be the consequences of that? Why do we need science outreach? Why do we need community engagement? Why do we care about rural areas of North Carolina and areas of, North Carolina and other states that, as you said, might not have that institution right there? Why is it so important to reach those folks?
Yeah, great question. Like, so, if you think about kind of the state of everything going on right now, right? I think it's more important than ever to have a scientifically literate population, right? People that can understand, they may not want to be scientists. That's fine. Not everyone needs to be a scientist. We need other fields, we need lawyers, we need artists, we need people, a wide variety of careers to keep our society functioning and for a healthy you know civilization. But we also need people who recognize the importance of scientific understanding and when we're thinking about topics in the news and how it's portrayed, making sure people understand what does the science say, what is science, who are the experts, and how do we listen to them, how do we kind of sort fact from maybe fiction or people who are trying to put a spin on things to push agendas, right? So, I think it's really important for the younger generations to consider STEM careers, but also just to be aware of what is the scientific process, right? How do we learn about the world in which we live, and how do we make sense of that? And so, like I said, when we can connect the scientists and the experts to the communities, people see them as trusted voices. They realize, oh, these are not just some people pushing an agenda, and maybe some of them are, but by and large, the scientific community, it's things are peer reviewed, right? If something gets published, right, it's gone through, you know, multiple other experts have looked it over. They've tried to poke as many holes in their arguments as they can, right? And so understanding that process and how the process works is really important so that people can trust, when there's a scientific consensus about something that yes, this is what's going on. And so, like I said before, but having the scientists be those voices and having people recognize that the importance of science and the way science is woven into their communities, I think it's just critical.
Do you think, because I've heard you mention something twice, and I've been thinking about this. So, science education is a huge part of a lot of this. So, I know you do engagement, but your background is in education. Do you think it would be valuable to begin to kind of weave a little bit more of reading scientific literature, right? Being able to read an abstract, not necessarily, you're not necessarily required to know all the jargon, but understand what an abstract is, understand the efforts that kind of go into making a claim in a particular field, right? And then elements such as, the peer review, how do we know what we know and where did it come from? And then also, I think most important, like, what do we still not know? From your background in education, are there opportunities for us to kind of weave some of those elements into kind of our educational curriculum?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You know, I think it's already baked into some of the curriculum in high school and some of the science classes. I think it's a message that bears repeating, though, for sure. I think it's something we think about, when we're engaging with the public, in our building and in our outreach activities. That's something that we talk about is the scientific process, and how do we, as we're thinking about replacing our exhibits and we're thinking about, the summer camps that we offer, and we think about the workshops and things like that. Definitely at the front of the mind is the scientific process and that whole, way of doing things, way of understanding, you know, way of making claims about science and backing it up with evidence. So for sure, absolutely, that's critically important.
Yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. No, 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 you're absolutely right. Because I think one of the things that I find so exciting about science, and it was a huge transition for me from science education that's like K through 12, even undergrad, to the process of getting my PhD. It went from what I view most science education as being, and this is no knock, but this is just what it is, memorization and a kind of regurgitation, right? Now, educators, they do a lot of work trying to find creative ways that they can kind of test how much you absorb from that kind of memorization process. But it's hard to kind of replicate what science becomes at that kind of like as you said, at that professional, that physicist level, where it goes from memorization and regurgitation to exploration of the unknown, right?
Mhm.
And to that point, one of the things that I really love about science, and one of the things that I want to see more present in science, and it's what I hear a lot when I go to your events, is what don't we know? There's which is a hard conversation, right? But yes, it's fine. Let's celebrate, let's understand and create a foundation on what we already know. But let's really start talking about, hold on, we don't know that yet. Or hold on, we don't know that yet either. And I think your stuff really kind of touches onto that. But anyway, I'm gonna hush up. Yeah, what are your thoughts about kind of like this element of curiosity and question driving conversations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, when you see things like project-based learning, it's becoming more and more, not just the rote memorization of facts and formulas, but how do you solve a problem? How do you, tackle a topic given some unknowns? I think, when I was in undergrad, take my physics final exam and it's like it's nothing I've seen before. They're trying to test you on how do you apply what you've known to some new, problem. And that was frustrating at the time, but I really appreciate now. It's like, oh, this is exactly, what we need to be doing. It's like, right. So we're figuring out how do we, take what we've learned and use those tools to tackle the unknown, to learn something new. And I think that kind of also correlates a little bit with, you look at the careers and the jobs that are out there now, and the students that are kind of matriculating up through elementary, middle, and high school, the career options that they're going to be, the jobs that they're going to be in 10 years don't exist now, right? So, we're not necessarily preparing them to do a job that exists, right? Because, with technology advances, now you talked about AI, machine learning, upending kind of the ways that industry works. There's so much change happening so quickly that I think, preparing the next generation of STEM professionals to be able to adapt to new situations and to be ready for careers and jobs that don't exist yet or don't exist or will be different by the time, they're being hired into the job market is really important. And I think, as we also look at, the economy of our state and the nation, right? So the jobs that are coming to North Carolina are increasingly, STEM based, right? There's so much in, computer science, there's so much in, advanced manufacturing. We look at all of the plants that are being built, around not just in the triangle, but even in rural parts of the state, right? Those require advanced degrees and they require high levels of STEM proficiency. And so I think it's really important for our students and the folks who are going to be entering the job market to be able to adapt to those needs.
That is absolutely crazy when you just think about just the aspect of jobs, labor market. You- when you're talking about like the new jobs that are coming online, at one point in time, it was a job to be lowered into the melon of a sperm whale to retrieve jelly or the fluid
Mhm.
for whale oil because that was such a critical aspect of economies, right? That was a job that no longer exists. I mean, when you talk about jobs of the future, right? That's an easy task, but another task that is not, you know, really engaged in as much is wait, what job no longer exists,
Mhm.
right? I
Yeah,
was I on another episode, right? And there's no other episode of the Richard Watkins podcast that is better than this one. All right. So I'm just gonna go ahead and point that out. No other episode has been better than this one. But
of course not.
I had another one, right? And we were talking about quantum computing. And there was an element of that episode. I was like, hey, one of the things that was crazy? And she was like, what? I was like, Katherine Johnson? And she's like, yeah, everybody knows Katherine Johnson, Hidden Figures. I was like, yeah, it's an amazing movie. But one of the crazy things about that movie And she was like, what? I was like, her job, her job was a computer. Like the concept of
Hmm.
computer when Katherine Johnson was around as a professional was drastically different
Yeah.
than the concept of computer now. Then it was somebody who just did math problems all day. Now, obviously, they're devices. But that is, I don't know any better crystallization of the concept that innovation changes jobs forever.
Hmm.
And man, so when you travel and you do this work, how is that conversation different in the triangle versus the Outer Banks or versus, Mountain, Western North
Sure.
Carolina, Asheville, and West? How is that conversation different?
Well, I think it's, there are some trends and some things that we see that are kind of happening across the board, right? We're seeing changes in the way that AI, and Chat GPT is being used, we talked when I talked to, community college, partners, across the state, they're all wrapping their heads around how do we use AI to help make our jobs easier, but how are we also, how are the students using it, and how are we, making sure that they're using it in ways that are beneficial and not just doing all their homework for them and then they're not doing anything, right? But so I think there's some things out there that these kind of conversations are happening across the state, and with this being such a new topic that people are still wrapping their heads around it a little bit. But then when it comes to like the application of and the job markets and what are we training people for, that's so, region specific, right? Because different parts of the state have different industries. There's different environmental concerns. There's different, cultural factors that play. And so, when you talk to a partner in Western North Carolina or Eastern North Carolina or here in the Triangle or Charlotte, there's just different industry, different types of jobs. And so, we think about what's going on in the communities. It's really all community specific and community driven. And that's where, when we think about the work that we're doing, as Morehead Planetarium Science Center's community engagement team, we can engage with our community here, in Chapel Hill, in the Triangle. We know the partners here really well, but when we start getting out to other parts of the state, how are we thinking about community connections and encouraging our partner organizations to bring in those community, the businesses, the community colleges, the libraries, the universities, the museums and science centers, the parks, state parks, national parks, town and county parks, right? There's so much happening in communities, and there's so many connections. Um, and so what we're really interested in is making sure that those people are connecting with one another. They're participating together to produce an event that makes sense for that community, because that's what it's really all about. It's not us, from UNC Chapel Hill kind of coming in and doing an event and then leaving, right? It's how are we celebrating and shining a light on what's already happening in communities, and if we can help, great. But sometimes it's us just getting out of the way, making some introductions, and giving them some marketing support, and these are the folks that are out there. They're passionate, they're excited, they're doing the events, they're doing outreach already, and they just want to continue to do that and make connections and celebrate the STEM that's happening, in their communities already.
So, obviously I'm biased. I don't know of another state that does science engagement, scientific outreach quite like North Carolina. I say it from the chest when I say you can't spell science without NC. I mean, it's just a fact. I mean, it's just a fact. But then I think like, why didn't South Carolina come up with a saying like that? You can't spell science without SC. But they didn't. But that leads me to my next question, right? What, what's your awareness of similar initiatives or similar efforts in other states? And, what do other states do to celebrate science? Is there a science festival, in Texas, right? I would imagine that would be cool, or a science festival in Washington or California. But, what do other states do?
Yeah, I mean, I mean, first of all, North Carolina has an incredibly rich STEM ecosystem, between, it's so many different networks that are all supporting science education and outreach outside of, the formal, the Department of Public Instruction and the formal education, right? So we're incredibly, blessed that we've got so many great partners, so many great resources in our state, which have really helped make us, I mean, I think, and maybe I'm biased because I live here and this is my home, but I think North Carolina really does have one of the best STEM ecosystems in the state with all of the different partners that come together to support um, STEM education. And that's one of the reasons that North Carolina was able to be the first statewide science festival. So I guess I'll back up a little bit and talk about the kind of the history of the science festival. So back in, I don't know, 2007, 2008 or so, the kind of the first wave of science festivals were coming to the United States, and they had been a thing over in Europe and England for a long, long time. But the kind of the first wave were coming to the United States in places like the Bay Area and Philly and Cambridge. These urban you know cities that are hosting these science festivals. It might be a few days, might be a week. And our leadership team went up. They were at the MIT Museum visiting up in Cambridge outside Boston, and they happened to coincide with the Cambridge Science Festival, and they said, "Oh, this is really cool. Let's we should think about doing something like this." And they came back and talked to our advisory board and started getting ideas together. And they said, "You know what? You know, Morehead Planetarium as part of the UNC Chapel Hill, our mission is not just to serve Chapel Hill and the Triangle. It's to serve the entire state of North Carolina. So we're not just going to do a Chapel Hill Science Festival or a Triangle. We're going to do a statewide science festival." So they said, "Figure it out." And our team, our director at the time, Jonathan Frederick, and the co-founders, Todd Boyette and Denise Young, they got together and they started reaching out to the network of partners that we already knew. We started with museums and science centers. We started with universities, and we got them together and said, "Hey, can we do something statewide and all have events, at the same time to celebrate science?" And it, we did it. It took off. It's grown from about a 2 week festival to now it's a month long. We have not just the museums and science centers and universities and colleges, but we, like I mentioned before, libraries, parks, businesses, clubs, you name it. It's a really broad coalition of partners that gets together, and everyone hosts these events in April on different topics for different audiences, all under the Science Festival umbrella. And so we were the first statewide festival. There are others out there who are doing some really great work. Wisconsin Science Festival, the COSI, the Columbus Museum of Science and Industry. Uh, they're growing into us. They do a great science festival that kind of started it there in Columbus, but it's now growing to be statewide. There are a handful of other statewide science festivals out there. Maybe I'm biased, so I'll say we're the best, but they're all doing great work and doing things that make sense for their states. And so, we get together, we talk with our peers at those other organizations because, it's great to share ideas and see what works for them and what ideas we can borrow or co-opt. So there's a whole network, the Science Festival Alliance, that we get together when we'll be meeting up in Philadelphia in just a couple weeks, to share ideas and have our annual conference, to get together and talk about those things and how we can work together and promote science. So, like I said, there's a bunch of other folks doing either city, local, regional, or statewide science festivals. But, I think I'm not one to really toot my own horn or our own horn, but when we go to these conferences and talk to our partners nationally, I think we're kind of seen as the gold standard, right? North Carolina, because we've been doing it the longest, we have the most partners and the most events. And that's really a testament to, I think, like I said before, the network of support that we have, this tradition in our state of valuing informal science education. And that comes from like I said, the network of partners, those different STEM ecosystems and networks throughout the state. It also comes with support, from the governor's office. The last four governors now, have all proclaimed April to be STEM Education Month. in conjunction with the North Carolina Science Festival. So that's, that shows that, we have both sides of the political aisle. It's really truly STEM education is valued in our state and continues to be a priority um, for North Carolina's economic and cultural and scientific development.
Absolutely, absolutely. A huge shout out, name drops. You mentioned Jonathan Frederick. He's leading the Marbles Museum in Raleigh, North Carolina. And there's another one, Todd Boyette. He leads up the Morehead Planetarium and Science Center. Two great friends of mine, two amazing people. I just want to go ahead and be like,
Yeah.
you dropped some names here. Let me go ahead and let the audience know. Um, and that's just
And
really, really
Denise Young, who leads the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences now in Raleigh.
great. Say that name one more time. I was talking over you. Go ahead.
Oh, it's Denise Young. So she was our director of education, and when we found co when she was one of the co-founders for the science festival, she's now running the state's Natural Science Museum. So incredible group of people who got this started, and it's all the work we're continuing to do now is a testament to their leadership at the beginning.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And also thank you for giving other states their flowers too, Madison, Wisconsin, Philly, Pennsylvania. So other folks are doing great stuff too. So thank you for, shouting out other states. But, clearly no one does it quite like North Carolina. And obviously that's a testament to the folks you've mentioned, but also yourself. But I really want to make the most out of your time. Thank you so much for being with us again. For the folks listening, this is Erik MacIntosh, Morehead Planetarium Science Center, focusing on community engagement, also the North Carolina Science Festival. He's with us talking all about outreach, engagement, how he got into what he is getting into. But talk about, kind of other programs. I also want to give you an opportunity to talk about other things. I know one of the things that I wanted to hear you talk about are the science cafes. You and your team do an amazing, amazing job on that. I know Jonathan Frederick, who we just mentioned, was over that at one point. But talk a little bit about the science cafes, the goal of the science cafe, and what has been your experience so far with it.
Yeah, Carolina Science Cafe has been going for, well, I don't even know how long now at this point, 15 plus years. And it's a monthly, we had a little bit of a hiatus during, the COVID pandemic. But otherwise it's been a monthly, opportunity for scientists and researchers to talk about the work that they do in an informal setting, right? So, it started at the Morehead building, but it quickly just we realized like, hey, let's do this at a bar. It's a more laid back experience. It gets people a little bit more, it gets to be a little bit more interactive. It's not just, a lecture or a presentation, right? It's a way for scientists or the expert to talk a little bit about the work they do, but then answer questions and have a conversation with the audience about the topics. And so, we've had, I mean, I was looking at the list this morning, just an incredible lineup of presenters over the years, from not just at, we're based at UNC Chapel Hill, but we have experts from all across the triangle and sometimes even further beyond. So, next month we have a professor from Duke talking about primates and research, in terms of primate behavior. Dr. Susan Alberts will be joining us. So that's something we do the first Tuesday of every month. At right now it's at Haw River Tap and Table in Carborough. So it's a great venue. We're glad they have us. And Sigma Xi, of course, helps sponsor that event and provides appetizers and food. So it's really a great, way just for people to come together, learn about a new topic. We have different topics every month. We've done some fun, collaborations with things like, the UNC Postdoc Association or other initiatives to really shine a light on, like I said before, it's really important for people to hear from the scientists, the people, the experts who are on the cutting edge of science and discovery. And so, it's a great opportunity. We're one of there's a number of other science cafes across the state and across the country. But it's a fun opportunity just to engage in a topic in an informal setting that's not quite as stuffy as sitting in a lecture hall and on a university campus, right?
Hey, listen. Lecture halls at university campuses are not stuffy. And there's also pizza there as well. When I was a hungry graduate student, I was so hungry all the time, right? I don't know, right? I guess doing work makes you hungry. But there used to be, I don't know, like a Facebook page or something like that that would tell you where all the seminars were around campus that
Mhm.
had food.
They had the free
And so
pizza and
you would,
free bagels and coffee. Yeah.
hey
Yes,
man,
I think
I loved
those
it because
conversations, those message boards still exist.
they might, So listen, free lunch all the time, but it gave me an opportunity to hear presentations outside of my discipline,
Yeah.
which is what makes Science Cafe so great. Because on one hand, you can hear, elevator pitches, hosted by the Postdoctoral Association. The next month, you can hear something about the red wolf in Eastern North Carolina. It's just really, really amazing. And again, you name dropped again. So for the audience, Sigma Xi, just a scientific community for scientists and folks who love science. It's international and it's chapter based. And the one based at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill is just hands down the best, like empirically, objectively. I'm just sorry, and there is nothing in my background that would suggest that I would have a bias for the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Nothing at all. But they're amazing. I serve as the president of that, and we buy pizza for the science cafes that the planetarium hosts, and it is absolutely awesome. When can folks, if folks are in the area, I know folks listen to this podcast from around the country, but if they're in North Carolina and they're in the Triangle, how can they check out the science cafes?
We have all of the information posted on the Morehead Planetarium website. Just search Carolina Science Cafe. You'll see the next one on our calendar is going to be Tuesday, June 3rd. Um, and like I said, monthly, first Tuesday of the month. Sometimes with holidays and things they might shift, but by and large, that's the regular schedule. So uh, you can, we also have a listserv that we send out announcements and reminders of upcoming dates, so you can feel free to join that. But just do a quick search for Carolina Science Cafe and Morehead Planetarium, and you'll find all the information you need about that program.
Yeah, that leads me to the next. Where are all the ways that people can keep up with not just the Science Cafe, but with all of the offerings by you, your staff, the Morehead Planetarium and Science Center? Where can they keep up? How can they engage? And actually, how can they support if there are opportunities for folks to support?
Yeah, great question. So, for the Science Festival, which is kind of the main focus of my job, ncscifest.org, ncscifest.org. It's we have you can sign up to stay connected, join our monthly-ish newsletter. We don't spam people's mess inboxes too frequently. It's about once a month. During the Science Festival in April, we switch to weekly, but otherwise, it's a pretty, just give some regular reminders and upcoming reminders about deadlines. Like, hey, you want to host an event as part of the Science Festival? When do applications open for that? Are you a scientist who wants to get involved and do outreach? You can sign up and we'll help connect you with opportunities to talk about the work that you do. Are you a teacher looking for resources for, you want to host a science night at your elementary school? We have lots of different opportunities. If you're a company that wants to get involved and sponsor the Science Festival, of course, we'd love to have a conversation. All the information is on the Science Festival website, ncscifest.org. Similarly, for Morehead Planetarium and Science Center, moreheadplanetarium.org. Just do a quick search for us. You'll find us. And then you can also, follow us on, I'm terrible at social media, but we have, Instagram and Facebook and Threads, I think is the other main one that we post on. And of course, LinkedIn as well for the planetarium site. So you can follow us on any of those social media platforms.
Eric's like, I'm terrible at social media. I think we have a MySpace account. I'm not sure. Hey, listen, I had a great time talking to you, but what always happens, right? I have the luxury and honor of talking to just the greatest people in the world, right? And you are no exception, but that comes with its share of problems. At the end of the episode, I end up kicking myself over and over again because, oh, I should have asked them this, and oh, why didn't I follow up with that question? And so there's always something that I wish that I would have asked you. But I also think, there is probably something Erik wished that I would have asked him, right? You might have been preparing yourself for that one question that I never asked. And so, with the waning minutes of our time here together, what question should I have asked you? And after that, go ahead and answer them, right? Go ahead and answer them, right? And so the floor is yours, Erik. Go ahead and close us out.
Wow, yeah, put me on the spot here. I thought you were the one that had to come up with all the questions.
It's
I
a
think
new day. It's the evolution of interviewing.
all right, guys. So I gotta do my own interview here, huh? For the last couple minutes. No, it's fine. I think just one other thing I'll mention. Morehead Planetarium Science Center. We're fortunate to be on the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill. We've got a ton of great scientists who are willing to work with us. Um, but we're always looking for more connections and more ways. And, I mentioned our Science for All. Tagline is something we really live up to. Each year we produce the Science for All Summit, which is a conference dedicated to expanding access and opportunity in STEM, um, education, and careers. And so that happens every year. And we have a youth summit that's for fourth through seventh graders that adds on. So um, I guess the thing I'd say is that if people are out there are interested in partnering with us or in exploring opportunities for collaboration or have ideas for new outreach initiatives or new events, um, always happy to have those conversations. When we think about you know our mission of serving the entire state, we really, we truly, that is a priority for us, is to make sure that we're not just focusing on Chapel Hill and the Triangle, but we're really reaching communities, some communities in the Triangle that haven't had opportunities or have been historically excluded from opportunities to engage with STEM, but also in rural parts of the state who, they're, like I said before, economy is changing, job markets are changing, and so we want to make sure that we're, you know, providing opportunities for everyone who wants to engage with STEM education and outreach. And so, if you know of an opportunity or a way that we can partner, we're all ears. We're open to having those conversations. And so our proverbial door is always open, for new partnerships or ideas. So feel free to reach out to us. Our contact information is all on our website, and we're, like I said, we're always open to those conversations.
Erik MacIntosh, folks. UNC Morehead Planetarium Science Center, North Carolina STEM Festival. Thank you so much for joining with us today. I really, really appreciate it. There is never enough time, but I just want to thank you once more for being with us today. But moreover, thank you for your service. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much, Erik.
Of course, thanks so much for having me today.
All right, take care.